Though she has very strong competition, I would make the argument that Daenerys Targaryen is the character ruined the most by HBO's Game of Thrones. She wasn't understood as early on as the beginnings of this adaptation, and when we get on into the later seasons, she begins to lose all of the characterization that makes her such a fascinating person in the books, and we end up with the obviously terrible in a billion different ways Mad Queen Daenerys that isn't established with any of the characters prior characterization in either the text or the show, comes out of nowhere, does nothing for the character, and then she eventually needs to be old yellered by Jon Snow, who is also completely butchered by the show. But regardless of that, Daenerys does still have an alternative future, and that lies in the books, if they are published, which I believe at least The Winds of Winter will be. Today, I want to go over Daenerys' recent past in A Song of Ice and Fire, and where exactly she might be headed in The Winds of Winter, as she has one of the most variable and interesting arcs upcoming in the future of the series, in my opinion. At the end of the third book in the series, A Storm of Swords, we see Daenerys ending this essentially tour of Essos and Slaver's Bay, where she's been going from city to city, liberating slaves and changing their way of life, at least in the instance of her being there, though we hear some instances of these places maybe slipping back into their old ways after she departs. She resolves to remain in Meereen and rule there, and that is exactly what she does throughout A Dance with Dragons. Daenerys' arc in that specific book is one of the most controversial in the series history. I know a good many people who do not like it. I quite like it. I think it does have some flaws. I think it has some fairly large pacing issues in a couple places. I think Daenerys 3 in particular is really not a great chapter, but regardless of that, I think her arc works fantastically on a thematic level and gives an excellent journey to this character who is very much learning how to be the best ruler that she can be. Daenerys' arc in Meereen is all about testing her. Martin always says he loves putting the human heart in conflict with itself, and we see Daenerys' heart in a massive war against itself at this point, as up until this point, Daenerys has kind of been going from city to city, just doing what she wants, freeing who she wants, and not really having to be concerned about the long-term impacts of her actions. Here, we see her devoting her focus entirely to the preservation of peace in Meereen. She is willing to make sacrifices on her own personal morals and standards to ensure a better life for the people who live in her city. This is what makes me believe I think she's a really good ruler, genuinely, as she is doing so much to ensure the safety of her people while still trying to balance all of these outside forces and just trying to maintain peace in a region, especially considering her very young age in the books. I believe she's 15 or 16. I always get the book ages mixed up with what they were in the show. I believe she's 16 at the end of A Dance with Dragons, which is frankly insane. Daenerys' journey in A Dance with Dragons is a constant push and pull within this city for itself, essentially. Given that this group, known as the Sons of the Harpy, arise and are essentially this representation of the former Meereenese nobility, the slavers who had made their way of life for a long time before Daenerys shows up. They end up killing a number of her people, including several Unsullied, and because of this, she ends up being essentially brought to the table in order to negotiate and further come to terms to embrace this city and its people and its culture and allow both her ideals of freedom and of protecting her people to flourish within what already exists of this very rich and storied city, though that rich storiedness was built on the backs of many, many slaves in that instance, so a lot very much to change and change for the better by Daenerys. It's a very interesting and rich political circumstance, as there's a lot going on in Meereen, and that really isn't communicated in the HBO adaptations. There are a number of different people who are all vying for Daenerys' attention and influence, and characters like the Shave Pate, who is essentially Littlefinger of Meereen, are just completely discarded, though honestly, they're fantastic, and I'm excited to see more of them in wins, though I think the Shave Pate's probably getting executed right quick. As that's happening, there's another push and pull sort of within Daenerys herself, whether she should remain in Meereen and try to improve the lives for her people here, or should she finally follow through and go to Westeros. There are a number of temptations that are calling her to the land that she calls her home throughout this book, being either Barristan, who talks about it a lot, or the arrival of Quentyn Martell, a suitor who is attempting to win her hand for Dorne and offering the support of one of the great houses of Westeros in her eventual invasion of the continent to reclaim her throne. But she rebuffs all of these temptations in the name of peace and protection for her people, because she is truly a good ruler. Instead, she resolves to marry Hisdar Zolorak, a member of the Myronese nobility who was able to compromise on a number of points with Dany's new kind of ways of life for the city. This culminates in a wedding, and Daenerys' final two chapters are quite climactic and end up being a large inversion point for her arc going into the Winds of Winter. And before getting too deep into speculation, I have to ask, who do you want to see me cover next in this series? I've done a bunch of viewpoints at this point. I think now the majority of the viewpoints, but I have a playlist of all these videos, which I will link, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe as well. I really appreciate it. It does really help the channel. Daenerys' ninth of 10 chapters was the first written for this arc in Meereen, and I think that says a lot. It's very important. It acts as sort of an embodiment of this final compromise Daenerys makes, which she really doesn't want to make. She reopens Meereen's fighting pits, effectively gladiator pits, and goes to watch a match there. While it's unfolding, which Tyrion also happens to be present as he's performing as a slave in that instance with Penny and Jorah, she is not noticed as he is in the show, but regardless of that, Drogon descends on the fighting pit, killing a couple people, eating a pig, and this is the moment where Daenerys' bond with her dragon is fully formed. She takes a whip in her hand and is able to not only calm the beast, but climb on his back and fly out of the city. It's one of the most magical moments in the book, seeing her actually lift away and finally embrace this dragon. And Daenerys' final chapter, Daenerys 10: A Dance with Dragons, also deals with embracing the dragon. Drogon and Daenerys are adrift and alone in the Dothraki Sea, which is not an ocean, sorry Victarion, and Daenerys is essentially forced to reckon with her own psyche, what it means to be a Targaryen, and what she's going to do going forward. She's very sick. It's unclear why that is. It might be from berries she's eaten. People also think she might be miscarrying. In this instance, she is very much brought back to a basic level. She is removed from this idea of being royalty, being a queen, and she's just faced with the ghosts of the past. We see her talk to Jorah and Viserys, and she eventually ends up embracing fire and blood. At the beginning of this story, Drogon is said to have killed a girl named Hesea. This name and this little girl haunt Daenerys' arc throughout A Dance with Dragons until that name is eventually forgotten in the Dothraki Sea in her final chapter. This is a Daenerys going into the Winds of Winter that is quite changed from who she is in A Dance with Dragons. But that does not mean I think she's a mad queen. Daenerys' final chapter ends with her being encircled by Dothraki Khalasar, and we know that she's going to be headed back to the center of the Dothraki culture in the beginning of the Winds of Winter. Martin has referenced several times writing chapters for the Dothraki, and it does seem quite likely that Daenerys will, to go forward, need to go back. Quaithe also appears in Daenerys' final chapter in A Dance with Dragons. That is something that she says to Daenerys, and it seems as though going back is going to be going back to the Dothraki and kind of dealing with her unfinished business with this group of people, as a lot has changed since A Game of Thrones and she last saw the larger Dothraki, and it seems likely that she is going to, by some means, allow them to join her cause. Specifically, the thought seems to be that Drogon will be involved somehow, as Dothraki are very focused on their mounts. He is Daenerys' mount, and she does have a vision, I believe in the House of the Undying, of these widows of the Khals coming out of a great lake and bowing before her. So the thought might be that, oh, she could burn a leader there and end up being crowned herself, and then bringing the Dothraki back to Meereen to finish her business there. It's worth noting, however, that Martin has been pretty tight-lipped on Daenerys in the Winds of Winter. There are some characters we've heard him working on a fair bit, but I believe we only had two direct references to Daenerys in the Winds of Winter from Martin in terms of like what she's doing, what her arc is having happen, and we have no sample chapters in the Dothraki Sea. It's very mysterious, and she is missing from a large part of the latter half of A Dance with Dragons as well, as Daenerys 9 happens, and then she's gone for like, I think 15 or 20 chapters before Daenerys 10, which is quite remarkable and quite a big absence for somebody who has that many chapters in this book. But it is also worth noting that he has said some things, and it seems as though Daenerys and Tyrion are very much going to meet up. He has said that much, but he's also said that it might happen later in the Winds of Winter than one might think. So Daenerys might spend more time on the Dothraki Sea than one might anticipate, or Tyrion might be dealing with other elements in Meereen before actually meeting Daenerys once she returns. I did find something interesting while researching for this video, that being that Martin was once asked point blank whether either Tyrion or Daenerys will retire as a viewpoint once the two stories meet. Martin, of course, said no comment, but that no comment is kind of interesting. I really hope we have Daenerys as a viewpoint through the end of the series, but in the series past, Martin has shied away from showing the interior thoughts of a ruler who's making a claim on Westeros, and that could maybe apply to Daenerys going forward, especially if the idea that Jon might not be a viewpoint coming back from his resurrection after being stabbed. That could be kind of good, mirroring the ice and fire, with both of them eventually not being viewpoints. That could be interesting, but I would very much miss both of them. Before getting further into Daenerys' journey and what's actually going to happen to her in A Dance with Dragons, I think it's worth examining what exactly is going on with her internal state, as she does reach such a critical point at the end of A Dance with Dragons. Martin has said that she is going to embrace the words of her house, those being fire and blood. I've seen some people say, oh, that is going to mean Mad Queen Daenerys. She's just going to start burning everybody as soon as she comes back from the Dothraki Sea. I do not think that is the case whatsoever. I think her arc in A Dance with Dragons is all about compromising with her enemies in order to win concessions for her people and hopefully make everyone happy. I think that that is going to be the core of what changes. The work that goes into peace, I think, is going to be what's different. Daenerys going forward might have a lot less patience for those who inflicted harm on innocents or the people that she is trying to protect. I think she is going to be willing to take action against those people who she sees as having done injustice against her people specifically. I don't think that Daenerys coming out of the Dothraki Sea is going to have any patience for Sons of the Harpy who are trying to restore slavery in Meereen, or the Yunkish lords. I think that that is going to be something she's not even going to attempt to resolve peacefully. I think the rest of Daenerys' arc in the Winds of Winter is essentially going to be her journey back to Westeros. She's visited so many different places in Essos, and I think that there are a number of them where she does have lingering threads that she is going to have to resolve before she actually returns to the continent on which she was born. Or I guess she was born on Dragonstone, which is also technically Westeros, but not continental Westeros, so the continent adjacent to the island on which she was born. But regardless, overall, I think that this is going to be something that is kind of a going through each step by step, not dissimilar to her journey in A Storm of Swords. We see her going from city to city. In this instance, I could see her going to places like Volantis, where we see Tyrion talking to the Widow of the Waterfront, who says that Volantis is waiting for Daenerys Targaryen, in addition to these cities that have fought against her in Meereen. I think that this arc of going from place to place in Essos has exactly one logical final step, that being Pentos. I think Daenerys is going to confront the cheesemonger. Illyrio Mopatis is one of the most prolific schemers in Ice and Fire. We learn in A Dance with Dragons that his master plan seems to be placing this young boy, young Griff, Aegon the Sixth Targaryen, on the Iron Throne of all Westeros, to the point that he has kind of sealed Aegon away, protected him, kept him, and raised him to be a ruler from the time he was just a wee lad. Daenerys, I think, is going to be more than a little upset about this. She will know about Aegon by way of Tyrion, who traveled with him and John Connington. Shout out to the GOAT. But in this instance, I think she's going to be very upset about it, especially when she compares her own childhood to what Aegon had. Aegon was protected by knights and raised in the image of a ruler. Daenerys was always just one step ahead of the men pursuing them. She was kind of in the open and having to effectively, at least stories are to be believed, her and Viserys were kind of begging for things to just survive. They were being shuffled from house to house in order to just get away from the people who were trying to kill them, whereas Aegon was completely safe. It seems as though this is something that really wasn't a high priority to Illyrio. Illyrio already had Aegon, and I'm sure has a million ways to put him on the throne, but having these other Targaryens in the back pocket could be useful, so he decided to maybe involve them in some schemes and treat them significantly worse than his Targaryen, aka his Blackfire. In A Dance with Dragons, we see that Illyrio has a lot of affection for Aegon. He cares about this boy. We also see that Aegon is simply given an army because of debts in blood and via Illyrio's kind of arrangements. Daenerys was able to get an army for her brother by way of being sold to the Horse Lords. This is a massive contrast. I think that hypocrisy and the clear fact that Illyrio is trying to favor Aegon to Daenerys' detriment, to have done things that have actively harmed Daenerys, I think that's going to be a massive point of her arc. I think it's going to be the climax of her arc in the Winds of Winter, as there is going to be some confrontation between the two, maybe with Tyrion there as well, to further bring his arc full circle. By the Undying, Daenerys is called the Slayer of Lies. Some people take that to mean she's going to kill the false dragon Aegon Targaryen. I say no. I think that Aegon hasn't really lied. I don't think Aegon really knows who he is. The liar is Illyrio, this man who's deceived Daenerys and her brother for their entire lives and used them as pawns on the board. I think Illyrio is finally going to get what's coming to him, and I think he is going to be burned by a dragon. I think maybe his death is what Varys' death was in the show, but, good. That being said, I think Illyrio being dealt with will not be the end of Daenerys' problems with the false dragon. Martin has continually hinted towards a second dance of the dragons happening, directly in the text even, via Arion's second sample chapter for the Winds of Winter. And there is going to be a conflict between Aegon the Sixth Targaryen and Daenerys. Daenerys being the rightful queen, and Aegon being this usurper. As much as I love John Connington, that's pretty objectively seeming to be the case. Regardless of that, I think there is going to be some armed conflict there. There is going to be war, as I believe Daenerys will somehow learn that he is false or not who he seems to be. Whether that be from Illyrio or from some other source, who can tell? But regardless, there is going to be conflict between Daenerys and Aegon that erupts. We see her fight Cersei in the show. I think that conflict really doesn't work because there really isn't that much animosity other than just wanting the throne, and it doesn't really make sense that anyone would support Cersei at that point. But regardless, I think that Aegon is going to be very much beloved by the common people, which might further entrench Daenerys' desire to reclaim the throne and help these people sway them away from the false dragon who could be leading them astray from what would truly be best for them. Which honestly, I think Daenerys would probably be a better ruler than Aegon. Not probably, definitely. What am I talking about? I am not sure what Daenerys' endgame is. I do not think she'll be killed by Jon Snow. I think she is as likely to be Azor Ahai as Jon Snow, if not more likely to be Azor Ahai. I'd say probably more likely to be Azor Ahai. I think that there is going to be a burning of King's Landing, but I think the catalyst for that will be Jon Connington, not Daenerys. I could see Daenerys being blamed for the burning of King's Landing by the common folk, especially given the fact that many don't know about these caches of wildfire under the city, and if your city just starts exploding and there's someone who has dragons, I think commoners might make the leap that, oh, the person with dragons exploded our city. With that said, I have no idea what the end game is going to be for Daenerys in A Dream of Spring. I hope that she survives. I am unsure whether she will survive. We will have to wait and see. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm excited to see where Daenerys' arc goes in the Winds of Winter. I'd say she's one of the characters I am the most interested in because I think that it's something that a lot of people really haven't predicted a ton of, and I think that there are a lot of places where surprises could happen. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'll have many more in this series and others coming up in the near future, and I appreciate any and all support. I'll have many videos on A Song of Ice and Fire, House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones coming up, and I look forward to sharing all of them with you. Thank you again for watching. Goodbye, everyone.